afternoon, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and you are watching the Muddy Waters Podcast. The Muddy Waters Podcast exists to help the people of Maine know a little bit more about what's going on in Maine politics. Because the water of Maine politics is muddy. It's hard to really understand what's going on. And some might say that that's by design. But unfortunately, the mainstream media is not doing enough to keep us educated about what's really going on. And a lot of times when people are poking the sore spot of the truth, the mainstream media likes to ignore that it's happening entirely or try to help censor it. So we try to help the people of Maine know more about what's going on. Today is going to be a little bit different. We're not necessarily talking specifically about things going on in Maine, but this is an issue that affects people all across our country, and so it affects people here in the state of Maine. We're going to be talking a little bit about like some of the elements of the MAHA movement. I was inspired by the episode of the Joe Rogan podcast. It's going to be far better, no offense to my guest today, than what we're going to talk about in a different way here today. But when Callie and Casey Means were on talking about all the things that happens in our food and things like that. And so I was inspired by that. And I said, I know a guy who knows some stuff about health. And so we have with us today my guest and friend, Jason Gootman, who is a Mayo certified health coach. I think, is that the right term? Is that right, Jason?
Technically, it's a Mayo Clinic certified wellness coach.
There we go. I think I wrote it correctly in the description, but I failed to communicate it.
You were close.
Yeah, that was close. Yeah. So a Mayo certified wellness coach. Did I get it right that time? Perfect.
You just missed one word. It's Mayo Clinic certified wellness coach, but it's all very close.
Mayo Clinic. So thank you so much for coming on and being with us and helping add to the conversation.
My pleasure, Chuck.
Yeah. So kind of to get started, like, I think what's interesting, I've known you for a number of years. We knew each other through networking and business related stuff, and how we kind of got to the I think the seed that led to this conversation was we were getting together to do networking to talk about business. And somehow the conversation instead ended up being about those two things they tell us not to talk about, which is politics and religion. And we had a great conversation, and it sparked a number of different things. But again, as I mentioned, I was listening to that podcast by on Joe Rogan, and it's just crazy to hear all the wild things that were going on. And obviously we're really, I think a lot of people are really excited. Some people are concerned that RFK is in there, but the reality is, like, if RFK doesn't drop out and support Trump, does Trump win the election this year? So it's a substantial thing. And it really was the MAHA movement, I think, which was really what was behind that seismic shift that caused Trump to win. There are a number of other elements, but that was one of the biggest, most significant, the way RFK did that. And so, I just think the whole conversation is really interesting. So before we get into, that's kind of the background of where I'm coming from, but before we jump into like kind of all that stuff necessarily, just want to give people the opportunity. Like, I've mentioned your credentials, but who are you? What's your background? How did you come to this place? And then what exactly do you do on a day-to-day basis with your business?
Sure. So in short, I run a private wellness coaching practice, and that means a few different things. But the major things the major thing it means is I do personal wellness coaching with clients, and you can think of working with clients in that way. You can think of wellness coaching as guiding and supporting someone and providing accountability while they make lifestyle improvements. So think about the public conversation about eating better, exercising more, and all these things. I help a person do those things because we know most people who hear that those things are a good idea don't just snap their fingers and start doing those things the next day, primarily because change is hard. Our environment makes those things hard. And many people are busy and are being pulled in a million directions. So someone comes to me when they make a firm decision, it's time for me to be making lifestyle improvements. Will you help me?
Nice. And so, like, what got you into that field, I guess? Like, what's your if that makes sense.
Yeah, the first catalyst was, I don't even know if you know this about me, Chuck. the first catalyst was being an overweight teenager. That was hard, to put it simply. I didn't get what I needed from the adults in my life. Not blaming it on them, but that created a challenging period of into young adulthood, and that's the true catalyst for me was learning how to take great care of myself the hard way. That was not a smooth road, but it was a road that I'm thankful I traversed, and that's the true catalyst. That's what, not always for the best reasons right away, but that's what got me interested in studying nutrition. That's what got me interested in studying exercise science. And then eventually that's what got me interested in going to the Mayo Clinic to become certified as a wellness coach, to be trained as a wellness coach. The wellness coach training is the most interesting part. And I think it's relevant to our conversation, is wellness coach training can be thought of as training in the psychology of lasting behavior improvement and positive habit formation. Maybe for short, you can call that change psychology. It's what put together everything else that I had at that point in my life. The personal experience I had with this stuff, the acceptance, compassion, and kindness that I bring to this work because of my personal challenges with it, and my expertise in nutrition, exercise science, and holistic wellness. All of that was good and helpful, but learning how to help people change is what really put it together and really makes my practice effective and helpful. And I'd encourage people who are trying to make lifestyle improvements to not only look into working with a wellness coach like me, but even before that, to look into resources that delve into change psychology, because largely our culture says pick yourself up by the bootstraps and figure it out, and as Nike says, just do it. And there's a lot more to making lifestyle improvements than summoning sheer willpower. And I get to work in that place. It's an evidence-based place. I mean, people know the Mayo Clinic as a highly reputable hospital, and there's a lot of pop psychology out there, and so people truly think like this comes down to sucking it up and just doing it, or getting yourself motivated by listening to Tony Robbins, scream at high decibels. But there are actually evidence-based ways to help ourselves and help others make lifestyle improvements, and that's the space I get to play in as a wellness coach.
Nice. Well, I mean, being myself a person, I like to throw this, this elephant in the room. I'm not quite an elephant, but I'm bigger than average. And one of the things I have in my bio on X is the MAHA, the Make America Healthy Again mantra, and I've had some criticism about that. I was like, oh, clearly he doesn't believe in MAHA. But to your point, like these types of changes that I know I need to make, and sometimes I work on and sometimes I don't. That change psychology stuff is really challenging, I think, especially if you don't have the right supports and things like that. And so like it's not a matter of like not caring and not wanting, it's a matter of not prioritizing at this point in my life. And I think that must be a real challenge, because I think when you talk, I know that we've done networking together, a lot of people are like, oh, I know somebody who needs your help. The problem is they need to also want it and be prepared for it, right?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, I side when you said it's not that you don't care about it. I think that's a powerful statement to be out in the ether right now. I think most people care about their well-being. I think most people care about the well-being of their close ones. And I think it takes a lot of steam out of the conversation when we acknowledge it's not that most people don't care. For starters, I just think that's an important thing to say. Yeah. That struck me. So I actually forgot maybe your second point.
Wow, no, I forgot as well. So, but
Oh, maybe
yeah,
you were just
I guess
talking about, I mean, that general
the
disparity,
challenge
Chuck, that,
of working with people
um,
who aren't ready, I think, is what I was getting at.
oh
Yeah,
yeah, that's right. So, yeah,
yeah.
that's an important principle in the work I do is, um, you can't help someone who isn't ready, for help. And, um, the nice thing is, or the helpful thing is, most people eventually get ready. It's just something I've observed is, through their own challenges or the challenges of others around them, most people come to see, that their well-being is very important at some point, and then, uh, are more ready to make change. And what I'd share is, um, if there is someone in your life who would benefit from making lifestyle improvements, whether that's on their own or or working with someone like me, or in another fashion, the best thing you can do is lead by example the best you can, uh, be generally supportive, and when they are showing signs of wanting some help, um, that's when it's helpful to make a suggestion. Have you ever thought about reading this book? Have you ever thought about going to a presentation like this? Have you ever thought about working with a wellness coach? But before they're showing signs of, um, looking for help, uh, it mostly comes off as nagging when someone makes, makes suggestions. And, I think we've all been on. Most of us have been on both the giving and receiving ends of those well-intended suggestions that end up feeling like nagging, and sort of no one wins in those scenarios.
Yep.
Uh, so, yeah, I suggest waiting for those signs, then asking for permission. Hey, are you up for an idea? It seems like you're making some efforts. Are you up for an idea? And then, most people will say yes to that question. And then what you're doing, um, by definition, is giving solicited advice. If they give you permission to give advice, it's now solicited, and solicited advice, is received much better than unsolicited advice.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think one of the things that I think kind of relates to this conversation is, is what the struggles, in addition to wanting to make good decisions, um, uh, you know, part of doing that probably relates to what types of food people are eating. Is that right?
I mean, I think it's probably the most popular part of the public conversation about lifestyle improvements is food, and, um, it's certainly a big part of the equation for sure.
Yeah, and so like I feel like on top of, I mean, there's so many things in our culture. I think one of the challenges there are a lot of challenges to eating healthy. There's a lot of challenges to living healthy in our world, and a lot of it has to do with the information that we're receiving from a number of different sources, including the medical practice. So I'll share my story to a degree and say, like, when I go to my doctor, right, and he talks about the fact, like, we have a good rapport. I have a good relationship with my doctor, and being somebody who is more on the overweight side, we will sometimes talk about that. And I feel like I'm always trying to lose weight, and so he like at some point he'll make the comment, because this is what doctors do these days, right? Is say, well, have you considered using some sort of medication in order to lose weight? And like, but how many times do you want to know how many times he suggested that I get together with a health coach and I try to make different lifestyle decisions?
Mm, mm.
Zero.
Wow. Wow. It's common. It's not ubiquitous. There are physicians and other medical professionals making lifestyle recommendations, but what you experienced is the norm, and it runs deep, and, it's kind of crazy making when you get to the bottom of it. And I love that there's a public conversation, about this now, because, those of us who do what I do for a living, and other, sort of, wellness enthusiasts, have sort of been having what the public conversations that's been having. We've been having it for years. For it's not an exaggeration to say for decades. And, we know that, this is a statistic, a published statistic. 90 cents of every dollar spent on medical care goes to the symptom management of ailments that are reversible and preventable via lifestyle improvement. So that's known, that's public knowledge, that's medical knowledge. Yet the first response to someone being overweight, or someone moving in the direction of type 2 diabetes, or someone moving in the direction of cardiovascular disease isn't sort of what outsiders, aliens would be able to say, like, fix the food, fix the movement, fix the sleep, fix the relationships. That's what's obvious if we're able to get ourselves outside of the deep grooves that have become our medical establishment. It's not rocket science. It's not revolutionary. It's sort of like old-fashioned common sense. So it's very interesting that all of this public conversation is powerful, and I think it has potential to do a lot of good. And one thing that makes it so powerful is that it is rooted in common sense. It's not some newfangled. It's not artificial intelligence, for example. It's not a newfangled idea. It's old-fashioned common sense. And what we need to do to become a healthier society is have that conversation more. Have it in families. Have it in communities. Have it in schools, and certainly have it in medical offices. And change the culture. Make it common to be having conversations about this stuff.
Well, and that leads to the question, right? And I think that, well, actually, real quick, just because I think it'll be fun, because I think a lot of people are excited about this, especially in the MAHA movement. We'll go, and I want to show just a little fun clip, and then hopefully I remember my train of thought after that. All right.
I, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
I, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
do solemnly swear that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
against all enemies,
foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
that I take this obligation freely,
I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter. So help me God. Congratulations, Mr. Secretary.
All right. So I just thought it would be fun, again, to show that, because so many people are so excited about RFK taking the helm and running. There are obviously some people who are less excited. It was actually kind of funny. I have there's a page I follow. I may run it. We'll see. Called Southern Maine Republican. It's a Instagram page, and and I posted a shorter clip of that, and there were a number of people who wrote back some less than positive responses, mocking the idea because of his stances on vaccines, or his perceived stances, I should say. But there's so many people that are really excited about what he's going to do, because of the fact that, one of the problems, I think, in people being able to eat healthy has to do with the food that they eat, right? We talked about this, but when the government is essentially subsidizing bad food, the unhealthy food, some people ask the question, like, why does good food, why does the healthy food, why does it cost so much more than unhealthy food? And again, I would encourage you to watch the other podcast, but with Joe Rogan, but a lot of it is that our federal government is actually subsidizing unhealthy food, and they're encouraging, like, we've got things like so many people who are living on food stamps, right? And within food stamps, they can buy all this junk food that's unhealthy. And so, but regardless of all that, regardless of RFK being in there, which I'm excited about, and regardless of all the food, to the point that you're kind of getting at, is that's not going to fix the problem, right? People, we could have eaten healthy and made wise decisions and healthier decisions, even without RFK becoming the head of the Department of Health and Human Services, right?
It's a powerful point, Chuck. I sometimes have this conversation with people who are saying, all of these things need to change in our environment in order for people to be well. And they're not wrong that those things changing in our environment would make it easier for people to be well. But I always say to them, and I'm not saying this to be flippant, I'm saying this to make a point that I think is helpful, because many of those people saying that are people who do a great job taking great care of themselves. What I say to them is, if you can do it in the current environment, others can too. And this, again, it's not to say that there isn't a place for policy change that could help make our environment better, but it is to say that it's to help people become empowered and to realize that I hate to break it to them, but like, our environment's never going to be perfect. And
what are you talking? We got Trump,
and,
we got Tulsi, we got RFK. Everything is going to be perfect, right?
and life will always contain choices, and there will always be free will. And yeah, I mean, to a point, to some degree, I think I would warn people not to make any public figure a false deity. Like, you still got to live your life. And I just don't think that will ever not be true, that we're going to have forks in the road and choices to make, and that is ultimately up to us and up to our, and not always a solo proposition, but up to our more proximal support systems. We can create a culture within our families. We can create a culture within our local communities of various kinds, and I, in a lot of ways, I think those will support us more than what's happening in the District of Columbia.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I don't want to dismiss what RFK is going to do, what I think he's going to do, and the impact that that's going to have, because, like, the reality is, so many people, like, for instance, I think at this point, the type of food that we should be eating, we should all be eating organic food. Nobody should be eating non-organic food. Non-organic food, I don't know that it should exist at all. That's a bold statement right there. But, like, I just think that the stuff that we're doing to manipulate our food is something that I would call playing God. And I think he did it best. And I think we should leave that alone. And like, what I understand is, every time they manipulate and change food, they actually make it less nutritious and less good for the body, leading to, we got so many people who've got dietary restrictions and all this stuff. And I think it has to do with the stuff we're putting in our food, the things that we're putting on, things as they're growing, the chemicals that we're spraying on those. In order to make them survive, in order to, like, be able to produce more, so that one farm can make so much more in crops, and they can take up more of the market share, we'll say. All these things, I think, have obviously are having a huge negative impact on that type of food. But, like, I had a friend in church at one point a number of years ago, and he made a comment about organic, and he's like, you don't have to be uncomfortable about organic food, people. Back in my day, we used to just call it food. You and I had been talking, and I was like, this idea that we have to label food as being organic food, and the non-organic food gets to hold the title of food. Right? Like, the idea that the thing that is the aberration from nature is presented as the norm, and then the exception is the real food is just, it's a little silly, don't you think?
All of that's a little silly, and it is along the lines of that culture change. We need to make it normal to be doing the things that are salutary, and not make it like, today you have to be quote unquote weird to be well. You have to sort of be an outsider. You have to do the things that everyone else isn't doing. And so much so that the typical labeling in food stores that is the opposite of organic is conventional. That to me, the word conventional implies the normal way, the way it's always been. And organic, the label organic does have an implication of sort of being like newfangled or fancy or something like that. And to your friend's point, it's just food that hasn't been messed with,
Right.
which
Yeah.
which I always say. I hope this is helpful to people. That means it has. I like saying things in the simplest way. That means it has not only less of the bad stuff, but more of the good stuff, and meaning more minerals, more vitamins, more fiber, more of the things that our bodies run on. And it's a neat way. That is a helpful way to think about eating well. Is that it's not always about like being on defense and going through life with a sword and a shield and a sword and trying to watch out for all the bad stuff. You can think about it as nourishing yourself, and sort of food that's been old-fashioned food has more good stuff in it, and sort of nourishes you better, feeds you better.
Yeah, and so the changes, like assuming he's a successful, which I think he will be, and getting some things that shouldn't be in a lot of our foods out of our foods, or at least making sure people are aware, of what they're putting into their bodies. I think that that'll have a good impact, and especially if like we can change what people can get with like food stamps and things like that, because a big part of the problem when we talk about this stuff is that like people who are a little bit more well off, or you could argue are better at prioritizing their health, right? Because it's kind of both. And I want you to get into like talking about like the some of the other aspects of health that you work with people on, because food is only one element, and I feel like it's worth going into those other ones. But like in the current environment, when we're subsidizing bad food and the good food ends up costing a lot more, it's hard for a lot of people, especially if they don't have the right priorities, which we as a culture, that's something we struggle with mightily. It makes it challenging that even if you want to eat right, it's hard to do it. Like I myself know that the organic food is better and I should be getting it, but I also can see the substantial price difference between the two, and I have other things that I have to buy, and I've got to be mindful. And so sometimes with some things, yes, I'm buying organic, and other times I'm not, because of how much it costs. And one would argue that maybe I should be making better decisions there and prioritizing my health and figuring out other things to cut out of my budget, such as streaming services and things like that. But yeah, so I want to just kind of like, I think the hope is that if we can change that, and instead of subsidizing bad food, we're not, and instead of allowing people to use food stamps to buy things that just are unhealthy and bad for people, that should in and of itself make a substantial impact on the health of Americans, who are, I think, 74% obese, is what I've heard. So, but yeah.
I encourage people, Chuck, in addition to maybe make it simpler and maybe more accessible than the organically grown versus conventionally grown foods, is to think more about degree of processing, and to think about foods that haven't been processed at all, and foods that have been processed into oblivion, and and then to think about foods that haven't been processed at all, that are on the less expensive side. They're more common, staple foods. Examples of vegetables would be like celery and carrots. Examples of fruits would be like bananas and apples. Apples, especially in the fall when they're in season. If we go in that direction, we can often do some head-to-head comparisons and say, yeah, those those carrots are actually cheaper than that frozen dinner that's been, significantly processed, or that banana is actually cheaper than that candy bar.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So I just
Yeah.
encourage people to sort of constructively challenge. There's some truth to the idea that more nutritious food is more expensive than less nutritious food. But if we're willing to lean into, I don't have to have organically grown asparagus in December, and things like that, or I need to have tropical fruit in December, and we go with the more basics, we can often do fairly well within a regular budget.
Yeah, and what I think it's the money piece is for a lot of people isn't as there again. There's a significant segment where that does play into, but you make a lot of really good points, like making better choices about, what types of foods, actual food, rather than stuff in a can or stuff in a box or frozen stuff, and things like that. I think that are much better forms of like the real food, as you kind of say, is so much healthier. And then there's also like we as a society, we spend way too much money eating out. And I think that tends to be one of the bigger challenges. And then snacking are the other, are some of the other challenges that we have. But the eating out, like that gets at like another problem. So, but I want to because I think a big part of eating out, I know in my life, there's two reasons. One is I'm lazy, and I want something different. So I may have a meal that I've prepared in my crock pot in the fridge, but I don't want that right now. I want to go eat some Chick-fil-A. Like, this is a real thing that happened, I think, 2 days ago.
Okay.
Like I had some good food ready to go, and I was like, nope, I want to go eat Chick-fil-A. And so I went and bought Chick-fil-A. And so that's like a kind of the psychology side. But then there's like the days where it's like, I'm just super busy and I didn't plan well. And here I am, and I've got to eat something. And so I think, but those are some of the challenges I think we as a society face. But like, when you work with someone, like what are the main things that are like in terms of like helping? Obviously, a lot of it is accountability. Like you create a plan for people, but what are the issues that people need to address in terms of their health? What are like, I'm assuming sleep is one of them, food, those types. Like where do you start again, unraveling the mess of people's health, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, the place to start with each person is usually the place that person feels the most ready to start. A neat thing happens when a person jumps into a process like this, which is summarized by that saying, how you do one thing is how you do everything, is once a person starts taking better care of themselves, they usually start to look at all of the areas. In a sense, it doesn't make sense to be eating the best food, but only getting 4 hours of sleep, or it doesn't make sense to be moving your body in a variety of wonderful ways and not eating very, very nutritious food. So that really comes down to an individual situation, but most people end up working on eating habits, exercise habits, sleep habits, rest habits, and then for the people that want to go a little deeper, there's usually a stress reduction component to the work, which usually means looking at how they're approaching their work lives, how they're approaching their relationships. We could call this realm life balance, if that makes sense to some people. Those last realms often tend to be very important because reducing the stress or increasing the fulfillment in those realms by itself is helpful. But that's often where the time and energy is made for food shopping and cooking and going to the gym or going to the yoga studio or whatever a person is doing for moving their body. But yeah, we can't out willpower lack of time and energy. So cultivating that by looking at sort of more holistically how we're living our lives is usually very helpful.
What would you say is like of all the different categories, right? What is what could be like what's the more challenging thing for people to change in their life? Even people who come to you, they claim to be ready, maybe they aren't as ready as they think they are. But like what is the biggest challenge to people being able to make? Because we don't live in a day and age where we don't have access to information. And we can't find what are the right things that we should be doing that
Mhm.
we have access to the most information in human history. We definitely have the capacity to know what we should be doing. Um, uh, but like, what is the big hang up? What is the most challenging thing for people, or a couple of things, who are trying to like make better health decisions?
It's definitely different for different people, but it's a relatively easy question. If the question is, what do I see that's the hardest challenge? And in a phrase, I would say it's complex relationships with food. To go a little deeper, that you've heard the term yo-yo dieting. So that means people go on diets, go off diets, go on diets, go off diets. Diet culture sort of not sort of it messes with people. It
Hmm.
teaches people to approach eating in ways that are, I'll be straightforward, dysfunctional. And I meet a lot of adults who have a strained relationship with food, in part because of a history of dieting that has become a history of yo-yo dieting. Another That's like one part
Yeah.
of complex relationships with food. Another equally complex or difficult, messy area, um, we commonly refer to as emotional eating, commonly call emotional
Hmm.
eating. Um, that was popularized during the pandemic when people were in environments that were um, extra challenging, is a way to say it. I
Hmm.
always say the big four drivers of emotional eating are uh, boredom, loneliness, stress, and fatigue. And before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and after the pandemic, I often say that our culture is a petri dish of bored, lonely, stressed, tired. Um, so if you struggle with emotional eating, you're not alone. And, for people listening, that means you know what to eat. You often have positive eating habits, but when you're very stressed, or when you're very bored, or some other, we could say a negative feeling, um, you go to food, or you go to sugary food, or you go to junk food in general, um, essentially as a way to make yourself feel better. That's a very common challenge, and it's an awesome thing to help someone overcome, because you can help them overcome um, using food as a coping mechanism. Uh, you can help them achieve some results they want to achieve as a result of that, like losing weight, or lowering their blood sugar levels, or that kind of thing. But you also help them learn to meet their needs better, because you get to do this sort of discovery process of, hey, you're not having those cookies in the afternoon because you don't know they're not nutritious, not because you don't care, but because you're chronically tired in the late afternoon. And let's look at why you're chronically tired in the late
Hmm.
afternoon, and help you, whether that's get more sleep, get more rest. Um, uh, Paradoxically, maybe do more exercise, because that can actually give you energy.
Hmm.
And that's the complex stuff, and that's the fun stuff, um, because you're helping a person. I just think this is really cool. Like, it's just it's not a big part of our culture. So many of us get to adulthood, and we're good at many things in life, and we're not so good at taking great care of ourselves.
Right.
And most people can learn how to do that. And I know this is a long answer to your question.
No,
Getting
it's
into
great.
those complexities and those details, as opposed to being like, "Hey, just do it," is really where all of the power is, and where all the awesome results are. I'll make one last statement about this, Chuck. Is the people who come to me are the people who, even the people who care about them, their close ones, have said, hey, that's just the way that guy or gal is. They're not going to change. And I get to see and I get to help a person like that change and stay the great person they are in their in the other roles they have in their life, and become someone who takes great care of themselves, and in the process become happier and healthier. So that was a long answer. I'll pause and let you chew on it.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, especially, where you ended. I feel like there are so many things in our society where we we believe certain things about people, or I should say we stop believing in people and their ability to change. And I think it can be difficult and it can be challenging as we see people. I have a brother who has had some challenges not related to food, but related to some other things. And, it's an effort of the will to not give up on people. When you see people continually make poor decisions and have plenty of opportunity in America, you have tons of opportunity, and a lot of it does come down to like what decisions we make, how good care we take of ourselves, comes down to decisions that we make. You work a job, and I worked one for a lot of years that was it was too stressful, and you convince yourself that you don't have any other option, when the truth is there are a lot of other jobs out there, and it's emotionally stressful to even think about possibly changing, right? Even though like being in a unhealthy relationship where women will more typically women, although it happens to men as well, will stay with somebody who is not good for them because they're afraid of change, right? People will do that with employers as well. And I remember a number of years ago, I was struggling with I was borderline high blood pressure, and my doctor was like, again, maybe we'll get you on some medication. I was like, give me just a second. Let me see if I can make some other changes so that I don't need to do that, because as much as possible, I would prefer not to take medications, because though I am a capitalist, I do believe in capitalism. I don't believe in the pharmaceutical industrial complex. I don't believe they care about us. I think they're part of this larger web that wants people unhealthy and profitable. And so like, I don't want to take something, especially if I don't have to. And so I said, let me make some changes. And actually at that point, I ended up making a step back career-wise, because it was a better decision for me in my life. And I moved back from being a manager into, at that point, later on, I actually went back into the management role, and I didn't have the same level of stress with it that I'd had in the past. But the stress of being in a manager role at that point in my life where I was at, it was just affecting my physical health, and I made the decision to step back. But I think it's challenging to make big changes and consider that those changes need to be made. But again, going back to your other point, it's just like, I think we need, as a culture and a society, we need to stop giving up on people, and we need to believe in people more. And there is a piece that I feel like we should touch on, and I think I mentioned this to you before. I don't think we were live at the time, about the options in our culture, right? And South Park lays them out. You have two options if you want to lose weight. You have Ozempic, which is the weight loss drug that actually is also like for people on diabetes somehow. But anyway, there's Ozempic, or there's Lizzo. And Lizzo is, the singer Lizzo, who is, that's body positivity. Like if you don't qualify to have to be able to get, Ozempic with your insurance, or you don't have enough money, you're stuck with Lizzo, and you better enjoy you better love yourself no matter what size you are. And though I do agree, right, that you should love yourself no matter what size you are, this kind of internal, like, emotional struggle over the way that I look over my weight is something that has impacted me, and it can cause people to have these psychological things where they don't care about themselves, and they just beat themselves up and are constantly hurting themselves, which doesn't help you be able to change. And so people do need to love themselves, but they also, there's a difference between loving yourself and recognizing that like being proud of things that are not good about yourself is not a good thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's huge. I call what you're describing the acceptance paradox. And, I hope that you and others can take from me talking a little about myself when you asked me how I got into this work, that's huge. I'm the last person on earth to make someone feel bad about the state of their body, externally or internally. And yet, I'm also probably the first person on earth to believe in people and to know that they can become empowered and can do almost anything. And I'm also a nutritionist and an exercise physiologist and a wellness coach. So I know the scientific evidence about weight and wellness. And so I'm here for anyone, in my work as a wellness coach or acquaintances who are willing to do both of those, to fully accept themselves and to say, I'm ready to make myself happier and healthier, and I'm ready to make lifestyle improvements. And that what you shared from that South Park episode is poignant. The other way I sometimes talk about this, that I think this will make sense, is because the interpersonal part to me is extremely fascinating because of what the work I do, but I also think this ripples into our personal relationships. So we're sort of presented with two paths. One is to complain about our environment and say, how could anyone be happy and healthy in this environment? There's nothing I can do, sort of like a victim mindset. And then there's the pick yourself up by the bootstraps and do it entirely by yourself path. But we're social animals, and most of us would say that many, if not all, of the things we do well in life are the result of my parents helped me with that, or some teachers helped me with that, or some neighbors helped me with that, or some community members, some fellow community members helped me with that. And I think it's a neat thing to add to this conversation is, so yes, 2 points. We can be, I'll just use a colloquialism, we can be out of shape, accept ourselves, and want to get in great shape. And we also can find this middle path between being victims and thinking we need to do it entirely by ourselves and get the appropriate personal and or professional support to help us do it. Does that make some sense, Chuck?
Yeah, no, I absolutely think it does. I think that, we definitely can, accept ourselves while at the same time recognizing that we need, we need some support and seeking that support where we can get it. I think
it's almost the best of humanity is that we help each other survive and thrive. And this goes beyond the eating better and exercising more. That goes to, I imagine you had some support when you made the career transition you described. We can use support in our lives when we're working on improving the quality of our relationships. And I like to think of this idea as like the recycling symbol or something like that, that at any given moment in time, if I'm living well, I'm lending support to people and I'm receiving support from people. And I hope as we have this public conversation about making lifestyle improvements and improving our individual and collective well-being, that there's some of that spirit is infused of like, help your neighbor, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I definitely think that that's a huge part of the solution. So on this podcast, a lot of what we talk about is like what's going on and then what we can do, right? And I think the more I have this conversation, the more people who come on. One of the things that I talk about in general is civil discourse. It's my a thing that I bring up a lot, and I think one, just in general, if we want to change our country, Donald Trump is not going to do it. RFK is not going to do it. I'm not saying that they're not going to do things, but these two people in particular in this conversation are creating an opportunity, right? They're creating an opportunity for us to be able to make positive change in our world. Particularly one of the biggest things, Trump's doing a lot of things, but like I think one of the biggest things he's done is preserved free speech. I think that was one of the biggest concerns about the future of this country. There's many, right? But preserve free speech. And then Doge is finding out a whole bunch of other things about the money laundering systems that have been happening. Whew. But like the preservation of free speech gives us the opportunity to get out there and share the truth with people. And RFK is creating this other conversation around health and trying to get to the bottom of what's going on and stop these companies from like manipulating the world to making people unhealthy so that they can profit off of them. Obviously they've created an opportunity, but that opportunity, we need to capitalize on that. So we need to make healthy decisions, but we also need to engage in our community. We need to become members more and more. We need to enter into those places. And especially like when you're in like more liberal footholds, we need to do it boldly but respectfully, and engage in the conversation, because now is the time to do that. If we don't do it now, if we don't make those connections, if we don't make progress in convincing people, I like to point out, not because I'm a jerk, but because it's the reality, is that like, as much as we want to say that Donald Trump had this sweeping victory and that he has this mandate from the American people, the reality is he didn't, and I know that we don't have a popular vote president, right? And he did win the popular vote, but he didn't get more than 50%, right? Which means more than 50% of the people who voted, and again, I'm sure there's some fraudulent votes in there, and I'm sure that makes a difference. Like there have been people voting that don't have the legal right to vote. We know that some have done that here in the state of Maine because of the reporting of the Maine Wire. So we know, so there are these other factors, but the reality is that doesn't change the fact that there are a lot of people in our country that voted against this. And if we don't make progress in building bridges and building relationships with them, especially people within our families and people within our communities, we are going to miss out on the real opportunity that's been created by these two people and other people being elected. So that's kind of a sub point of what you were getting at, but I think it does touch on this idea of like, we need to be a community, right? So if we've got, for instance, this, it branches into, if you've got liberal friends and liberal family members, don't write them off. Don't stop believing in them. Just like we shouldn't stop believing in somebody because they've always been, overweight, or they've always had this addiction issue, or they've always had whatever. There is hope for people to be able to change. And I think we shouldn't give up on people, and we shouldn't give up on our society. We shouldn't give up on certain towns and cities. We need to continue to engage in civil discourse and being members of our community and loving people. That's a diatribe there. So I hope you enjoyed. That was all for free.
I did, Chuck, and I'm actually looking up something in some notes I have, and I think it's interesting because of it ties the present moment to a moment that before either of us was born, and it's from Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s uncle. When John F. Kennedy Jr. was president, this is a social media post I've made. There's a video clip of him making a speech, and it's short. I think this isn't the entire speech. These are 3 snippets. He said, "A country is as strong, really, as its citizens, and I think mental and physical health, mental and physical vigor go hand in hand." He said, "Our citizens are living longer, and we want them to participate fully in that longer life, but they can only do so if they give some of their time and some of their effort to maintaining that vitality." And he said, "I hope all of you will join me in a great national effort to build a strong and better America through physical effort and through the contributions we can make by the drive and force we bring into our daily lives." I think it's remarkable because I hope people can see this public conversation as apolitical, essentially as common sense. not as being something pushed by politicians. I think it's almost the opposite. I think the public interest in something like a Make America Healthy Again movement influenced the election. It's remarkable
Yeah.
that we're having a public conversation about this, because before that moment, 99% of Democrats and 99% of Republicans weren't interested. It wasn't on anyone's platform. I like to think that I think this movement has risen to the surface because I don't know if there's polling, what polling shows, but I think it's become this common sense issue that, whoa, it goes back to the statistic I shared earlier about 90% of ailments being lifestyle ailments. It's just a common sense issue that has had its time. And I think John F. Kennedy Jr.'s words are poignant to the moment and poignant to what we've been talking about in the last few minutes, in the sense that he asked people to make an effort. I think on almost across the board, there's been a shift in conversation that is essentially the United States government will solve all of the problems. And you're talking about community engagement. And I think for something like the Make America Healthy Again movement to really have an impact on our collective well-being, we're going to need to see things like people saying, hey, I'm going to the farmer's market on Saturday. Do you want to come with me? Or I'm making efforts to eat better, but I'm also going to talk to the folks at my synagogue or my church and see if they're up for maybe an overhaul of how we do the public meals there. And those kinds of things getting a hold, us sort of helping each other do these things, I think that's essential.
Yeah. Well, and you made a comment earlier too, kind of in the community segment about like, you don't necessarily want to go up to somebody and be like, you're kind of fat. You probably should eat healthier, right? You don't want to do that. But at the same time, there is a way to be helpful, I think. And I think people are just so afraid to talk about it. And I probably don't help because people make comments sometimes and they're like trying to be careful and cautious. And I jokingly, as soon as they do that, I'm like, oh, you call me fat? And just to kind of make them panic internally, just because it's a little bit fun. I'm a little cruel sometimes, but we all have fun. But like that gets at like this problem in our society where people are afraid to have conversations with people that maybe they could use some conversations and some support. Now, obviously, like having a conversation out of a relationship is the way to do it. But I think there is a place for having those conversations. I had a friend, and I was going on this like I don't know if I'd say I do the yo-yo diets, but to some degree, I've gone on diets. I lose some weight, and then I stop, being faithful to the diet. I usually do it there's a process that I back off and not all at once. And, but I was talking about how I was going to be doing something like that. And I mentioned it to the pastor of the church that I go to, and he made the comment. He's like, "Oh, that's good. I was thinking, there was this time where I heard you and it seemed like your breathing was really heavy." And I think it's just interesting that that's like one of the only, I do have a really good friend, mentor, that I would say that he does ask these questions. Like when I go to him and we have conversation when I'm like stressed and things. And one of his questions would be like, when was the last time that you worked out? Or, something along those lines, just recognizing that these types of things are, as you kind of said, this is all interconnected, right? Your health is all connected to all the decisions that you make. And I was talking about at one point about having it's not willpower is not the word, but it's in the same category. It's self oh gosh, what's the word when you can self-control. There we go. Having self-control. And the reality is if you have self-control in one area, it makes it a lot easier to have self-control in another area. And if you don't have self-control in one area, it's really hard to have self-control in another area. And so, but like having support and having people around you that care about you, like having accountability is actually like one of the biggest things. So anytime I've actually successfully gone on a diet, I usually have had somebody that I told that I was going to do it. And now that I've got somebody who I told is going to do it, they're going to hold me accountable. And some of the things like I think your business is going to do well in the coming days, because I think this is going to hopefully push more people to think well. But like not all of what you do, but some of what you are doing to help people could be done by family members and friends who care and are just there to be the accountability and are asking those questions and becoming, we should all become more educated about our health and the things that help us. But I think a lot of, there's, and on top of that, it would make your job a lot easier as you're working with people to have them have those additional supports, because even with having those, you still need that additional help.
That's brilliantly said, Chuck. That's very well said. I sometimes say that if wellness coaching does what it can do, it will ultimately put itself out of business as a profession, because really it's having a moment in time, because it's essential right now, because we don't have family structures that are set up for salutary habits. We don't have school structures. We don't have other local communities that are set up to cultivate most people engaging in salutary behaviors most of the time.
Sorry, you said salutary. Can you I have a pretty good vocabulary, but I missed that one.
Essentially, wellness promoting.
Okay.
Essentially, things can be sickness promoting or wellness promoting.
Okay.
And so we're kind of an atomized society. I think that's fair to say. So when people want to work on these things, they either do it by themselves, or if they're going to get help, they go get help in a one-to-one fashion. But yes, each time I work with a client, I'm helping them build out local proximal support systems that are going to be the scaffolding after the scaffolding that I am goes away.
Yep.
And if we did enough of that, if we collectively did enough of that, people would just grow up learning to take great care of themselves, and maybe there'd still be wellness coaches to help adults who fell through the cracks or were or could use some additional help. But yes, I mean, I'm saying this with a smile, because this isn't going to happen in 5 years or 10 years or maybe 100 years. But if our culture improved in a way that enough people made taking great care of themselves a priority, then ultimately there wouldn't need to be wellness coaches. This would be all propagated, all shared in families and local communities, and I think it's a good vision to have.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I think it would be a great place if we didn't. There are a lot of things that I wish we didn't need. Like I wish we were such a good society that we didn't need police officers as well. But to the point, like we didn't, like part of the reason that we need certain things is because of the problems that exist. And if we could, improve to the point where we didn't need wellness, health and wellness coaches, I think that would be, we'd have made some incredible strides. And I hope we move in that direction. I don't think we'll ever quite get there. But if we can make some progress, I think that would be great. So I'll ask like one more question and then we'll probably go ahead and wrap up. But one of the questions I have is like, what outside, we talked a little bit about food and some of the challenges that people have around food. What are some of the other or one of the other more like significant things that are impacting people's ability to be healthy as you work with them?
What comes to mind when you ask the question, Chuck, is with movement or exercise, there's still very much a sort of no pain, no gain ethos. And that's antithetical to exercising more. It's, deep in our brains is a pain avoidance mechanism. So when one thinks of moving their body in that way, that it has to be painful, and that can mean physical pain, that can mean that it's miserable, that can mean it's boring, it can mean a lot of things. Then they're creating essentially psychological friction between them and moving their bodies. The antidote to that is to explore the possibility that you can find a way or ways of moving your body that you actually enjoy. Don't have to love it more than anything, but even like it a little is better than thinking, oh, I'm going to go do this thing that completely sucks because it's good, because it's going to be good for me 30 years from now. That's not very motivating. We're much more motivated by the fact that it has some immediate rewards. This throws people for a loop because although the idea is useful in a lot of ways, a big idea in our culture is that most of the good things are the result of delayed gratification. But in terms of something like eating better or something like exercising more, you actually want to leverage the fact that our brains are wired for instant gratification and do everything you can to make the thing that is good for you also as enjoyable, pleasurable, and fun in the moment as possible. That is essentially, if things like no pain, no gain are psychological friction, making eating nutritious food and moving your body as enjoyable, pleasurable, and fun as possible is like a psychological magnet that draws you to it.
Yeah, and so I think what's interesting about that is like when you're talking about food, I think one of the things I would submit that one of the things that I think can help us train our minds is to remind ourselves of how we feel when we eat the food we like the most versus like, which is usually like bloated and versus how we feel when we eat healthy food, right? Like it's kind of trying to train our brain to think about those other things. But the other thing is like you talk about this and like this easy for me to say, I love playing basketball, right?
Okay.
Like I could literally play basketball like from morning until night
Awesome.
and have no problem playing basketball. But going to the gym for me is like, first of all, I have to go somewhere. Second of all, my non-gym body is on display in the gym, right? And like, so this is a challenge for a lot of people. I go to, when I do go, I go to Planet Fitness and they have this thing that there's no shame and whatever, but make sure you're not I don't know what the term is, but that's basically a knucklehead that's giving people a hard time for either by how you work out or commenting on them or whatever. But like, I think, but that's just not enjoyable to me. And like even strength training, which I think is healthier, even than some of the other working outs, like working out on an elliptical, which is something I've done in the past. Those aren't as good as strength training, but like, I think the time that I got into the best shape that I've gotten into in probably the last 10 years, I was on a diet and I was playing basketball like 2 or 3 times a week. And I got into like really good shape and I was having a lot of fun. And then I got distracted and went off to Japan and lost all of and came back with, having been on vacation. I didn't have all the practices built in and I let things go. And then the next thing, I'm years down the road and still struggling. But I think I get it. Cause like for me, I love playing basketball. That's an easy way to motivate myself. The challenge down here is that it's hard to find a game that doesn't cost money, that doesn't have a huge, like you can be in a league, but that's like a huge commitment. If you're not in a league, it's hard to find a place to play that doesn't cost money or play at all. Like that's some of the challenges, but that's the thing that I really enjoy. So that makes a lot of sense. Like you can use what you know about your body, like your psychology against yourself. Like it's really for yourself. But anyway, I think that's really interesting. I think it's really helpful. So Cool. All right. Well, thank you again, Jason. I thank you for, having the willingness to come on and expose yourself to the world by going on a conservative podcast. We didn't really talk about anything as you made the comment, like not a lot of what we said is really political. It's just about being healthy now, like, and the fact that some of the things that RFK hopefully is going to do is going to make it easier for people to be healthy, which I think is a good thing. And we didn't get into the other stuff that's more controversial about RFK, but that's not really your field anyway. So we'll leave that alone, and maybe we'll cover that at a different time. But yeah, I just want to thank you for taking the time to come on and talk about how people can, be more healthy in our world and celebrate that. I think, at least when it comes to food, I think it's going to be a little easier for people, but that ultimately the onus still lies on us. Like so many things with our society, I'm reminded of the line from the movie V for Vendetta. When V gets on, he's got this recorded thing and he broadcasts it to all the people, and he's telling this story about what happened. And he gets to this place where he says, "And what happened? And who's to blame?" He's like, "Well, certainly there are those who are more responsible than others, and they will be held accountable. But if you're looking for the guilty, you need only look into a mirror. I know why you did it." And so like that's the reality. The health situation in America is the responsibility of the people. The government that is representing us in America is the responsibility of the people. And so it's the responsibility of we, the people, to fix the problem. We can't trust in a man in this world to fix that for us, just like the Democrats want to trust the government and they want more government. The Republicans want less government, but we still tend to have this faith and belief that these people are going to accomplish it. And in reality, it actually comes down to us. So if you're out there, get involved, be involved in your community, seek to be a better person yourself, and seek to find ways to help other people and support one another in ways that are going to make our society and each other better off. How can people reach you if anybody wants to reach out?
Name of my business is Puvema, Puvema, and my website address is puvema.com, and that's the easiest way to get in touch with me.
All right. Well, thanks again for coming on, and the rest of you, we'll see you on Wednesday. We have a legislative update. We'll say we're going to be blessed with Jack Ducharme, Representative Jack Ducharme out of Madison, who's going to be sharing, I think, some on the ground stuff about what's been happening with the fun budget and supplemental budget process, where somehow, despite being in control of all aspects of Congress in Maine, the Democrats are blaming the Republicans for the things that they're unable to do. And we'll learn a little bit more about that from Jack on Wednesday. Hope to see you all then.